Maryam Monsef reminds us that she is the very worst cabinet minister to ever serve in a Canadian government. I'm Candice Malcolm, and this is The Candice Malcolm Show. Maryam Monsef is a Liberal member of Parliament from Peterborough, and she is currently a cabinet minister in the Trudeau government. She is the Minister for Women and Gender Equality in the Trudeau government. And today, she called the Taliban her brothers. The Taliban.
I want to take this opportunity to speak to our brothers, the Taliban. We call on you to ensure the safe and secure passage of any individual in Afghanistan out of the country.
She didn't even call them her brothers. She called the Taliban our brothers. Now, when she says this, when she says that the Taliban are our brothers, is she speaking as a Canadian? Why on earth would a Canadian woman say that the Taliban are our brothers? Or perhaps even worse, is she speaking as a member of the Trudeau government? Does the Trudeau government believe that the Taliban are our brothers? Last week, when the Taliban brutally took control of Kabul, toppled the democratically elected government in Afghanistan, and replaced it with an Islamist terrorist dictatorship ruled by the Taliban, the Trudeau government stumbled to decide how they would approach it. First, Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister Marc Garneau went on CBC and said that it was too soon to tell whether or not Canada would recognize the Taliban as the legitimate government in Afghanistan.
The U.S. had warned the Taliban if Afghanistan was taken by force, it would not be recognized internationally. Will Canada refuse to recognize a Taliban government?
Well, thank you, Katie, for the question. I would say to you, it's early days. Right now, we want to see what happens. The country has essentially surrendered to the Taliban. The Taliban is saying that it wants to run as a government, but we're going to wait and see. It's too early to answer that question.
You're waiting to see. Are you going to treat the Taliban with credibility?
Well, we have to see how they behave since they have taken over the country. Certainly, their behavior was totally unacceptable for the short time that they were in charge after the Russians left about 20 years ago. So we'll wait and see.
Trudeau sort of doubled down on this idea when he pleaded with the Taliban and tried to appeal to their better nature, telling them to step up and allow people to leave the country.
We need to see the Taliban step up and permit an evacuation of those who want to leave, and that is what we are expecting.
Now, seeing how that played out, Trudeau quickly adjusted course, and he strongly and firmly said that he would not recognize the Taliban as the legitimate government in Afghanistan.
Canada has no plans to recognize the Taliban as the government of Afghanistan. When they were in government 20 years ago, Canada did not recognize them as a government. They have taken over and replaced a duly elected democratic government by force. And as you point out, they are a recognized terrorist organization under Canadian law.
So he finally got to the right place and said the right thing. But think about it. It took him days. It took him about 36 hours to finally say what was right and what was obvious to 99% of Canadians. No, the Taliban is not legitimate. No, we do not recognize them. No, we will not work with them. We will not in any way, shape, or form acknowledge or support a repressive Islamist terrorist entity that just forcefully removed a government by raping and killing anyone who stood in its way. But Monsef's remarkable comments on Wednesday morning displayed something totally different. Calling these terrorists our brothers doesn't just recognize them as a legitimate government. It implies that they are our allies, that they are our friends, that they're one of us, that we're all on the same side here. This is perhaps the most appalling thing that I have ever heard come out of the mouth of a Canadian politician. Probably the most appalling thing I have ever heard come out of anyone's mouth ever. Now, fortunately, someone in the media did ask Monsef what the heck she was talking about and why a Canadian cabinet minister would call a despicable, repressive, barbaric terrorist group our brothers. And now I'll note that this is a member of the legacy media asking this question, so you can tell how there's a sense of deference, how it's very polite, and in some ways it's helpful to Monsef.
I have a follow-up. This is for Minister Monsef. In your statement, you referred to the Taliban as our brothers. Can you clarify your remarks? Is this an indication of the government positioning softening on the Taliban?
Hardly. The Taliban are a terrorist group, and yet they claim to be Muslims. We're calling on them to immediately allow for the safe passage of any individual who is in Afghanistan out of the country. We are calling on them to immediately cease the violence, the femicide, the genocide, the rapes, the lootings, and to return immediately to the peace negotiation table in an inclusive and meaningful way. If they will ever be recognized as a legitimate party, this is the starting point. The reference to brothers is a cultural reference, of course, but let me be very clear. We do not support the Taliban. We are horrified that the hard-won gains of the past 20 years are at stake like this and being eroded like this. We are horrified that our women and men in uniform had to move forward with a difficult operation that was only made more difficult by their actions, and deeply disappointed that their threats of ongoing violence have led to the international community, particularly the Americans, saying we're going to leave on the 31st due to these threats of violence.
And you can see that Monsef is in total damage control. First of all, she emphasizes how horrible the Taliban are and how they are, yes, a terrorist group, which sort of makes it so much worse that she would have referred to them as our brothers. Next, she plays Trudeau's favorite card in inventing creepy, politically correct language to virtue signal about being a feminist. She calls the Taliban's crusade a femicide, which I guess it means a genocide against women. I honestly don't understand what these liberals are saying half the time, and I don't think they do either. Now, finally, Monsef just sort of brushes off her insanely idiotic comment, calling the Taliban our brothers, by saying it is cultural. So if I read between the lines here, I suppose she is saying that in that moment, she was not speaking as a cabinet minister. She wasn't even speaking as a Canadian. She was speaking as a Muslim and perhaps as an Afghan. So is that supposed to make any of this better? That as a cabinet minister, she sometimes doesn't speak as a Canadian, but instead speaks as an Afghan? That she speaks to the Taliban as her brothers because they share some cultural and religious bonds from the country of her origin? But doesn't that just sort of undermine the entire idea of Canada, the entire experiment of a Western liberal democracy? Monsef came to Canada as a refugee. Here, she was given incredible opportunities to succeed, excel, and rise to the highest status in the country. She is a federal cabinet minister. And yet, she still looks back longingly at Afghanistan as her country, and she sees the Taliban as her family. She again had the opportunity to clarify, and she clarified that this is exactly what she means. Here is another question, this time from an independent journalist from Blacklock's Reporter. This journalist is not on Trudeau's payroll, he's not on the dole, so you can notice how he speaks to Monsef the way that a journalist should speak to a politician who has just said something crazy.
Thank you. And Minister Monsef, I'd like to follow up on this brother business. Frankly, if there's some cultural nuance here, I'm not getting it. I've never heard you refer to a Muslim Canadian member of the Conservative Party as your brother. Everyone is aware of the Taliban's human rights atrocities. It's just a really jarring phrase. Do you just want to walk that back now? Could you just take that back? Or do you really think the Taliban are our brothers?
I think this whole situation is jarring, sir, that there are terrorists taking over my beloved ancestral land. In terms of the terminology, if you go to masjids across the country, Muslims refer to one another as brothers and sisters. So, rest assured, I continue to believe deeply that the Taliban are a terrorist organization. Our government believes so. We'll continue to protect women, Hazaras, Shias, Hindus, Sikhs. We'll continue to do everything we can to get as many people out of their grasp in Afghanistan. And we'll continue to do everything we can with our global partners to make sure that the hard-won gains of the past 2 decades are not lost to these individuals whose mandate is not to govern. Their mandate is to oppress and to kill, and we condemn that entirely.
And again, she doubles down, refuses to walk it back, and defends calling the terrorists in the Taliban her brothers. What a slap in the face. A slap in the face to all Canadians, a slap in the face to women in Afghanistan who are currently being repressed in despicable ways. I won't even go into some of the details of what is going on in Afghanistan, what is happening to women right now. It is unspeakable, and it is a slap in the face to those women, what Monsef has said. But then again, this is Maryam Monsef we're talking about. Remember back in 2015 when she was celebrated as a member of Trudeau's inner circle. Remember the countless profiles and puff pieces written about her, the young woman who came from a humble position as a poor Afghan refugee who then rose all the way up to a high-profile cabinet minister. Only in Canada could such a wonderful fairy tale story happen. But then, sadly, we learned that much of her story just simply wasn't true. Monsef wasn't even from Afghanistan. She was from Iran. She was born in Iran. And she was hardly a refugee, given that she used to travel back and forth between Canada, Iran, and Afghanistan when she was in her 20s after she became a Canadian citizen. She said that her refugee application to Canada did list Afghanistan as her place of birth, and she blamed the entire debacle on her mother. How gracious. Even though she grew up in Iran, she claimed to have not known that it was Iran, that she thought that she was living in Afghanistan when she was actually in Iran. She says that her mother hid it all from her, and apparently she just didn't know the difference. Right. Well, here is the clueless Maryam Monsef awkwardly trying to tell reporter Robert Fife, the one who broke the story about her not being from Afghanistan and actually being from Iran. Here she is telling him that she was born in Afghanistan, even though you can tell that she clearly knows otherwise.
So you were born in Afghanistan, correct?
I believe I was.
Now, did you know that in Canada, lying on your asylum claim paper, lying on your citizenship application papers is against the law? It's punished so harshly that if a government finds out that you have lied on your application, it will strip away your citizenship. Even if this happens years later, it will go back and it will strip citizenship from you. It's called citizenship revocation, and it happens all the time. Here is the Liberal leader, Justin Trudeau, saying just that.
Revocation of citizenship can and should happen in situations of becoming a Canadian citizen on false pretenses. Indeed, when people have lied as on their applications, those applications get rescinded even years later.
Of course, rules don't apply to Liberals. Monsef is in Trudeau's inner circle, and so the rules simply don't apply to her. And criticizing Maryam Monsef is probably considered culturally insensitive. Some will probably say it is even racist. Well, guess what? My husband, just like Maryam Monsef, was born in Iran. And just like Maryam Monsef, my husband and his family came to Canada when he was a child. But unlike Maryam Monsef, my husband's family didn't try to sneak in the back door by claiming asylum and pretending to be something that they're not. And unlike Maryam Monsef, my husband would never, not in a million years, describe the despicable terrorists in the Taliban as our brothers. They're not. He would never say that. Don't be fooled by Maryam Monsef. There is nothing cultural about calling the Taliban our brothers. I'm Candice Malcolm, and this is The Candice Malcolm Show.